Hi everyone, welcome to episode 23 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. My name is Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, the strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. This was a special episode which we did live at the General Assembly offices in Melbourne. My guest for our first live podcast interview was Adrian Stone. Adrian is one of the most active angel investors in Australia, having made over 50 investments over the last few years. He is the co-founder of Melbourne's first accelerator program, AngelCube, and is the founder of Investors.org, which helps high net worth individuals invest in tech startups. In the interview, Adrian shares what he looks for in founders when deciding to invest, the opportunities for Australian startups, and the importance of understanding finance and metrics. Without further ado, here's my interview with Adrian Stone. Hi Adrian, welcome to the Startup Playbook Podcast, and thanks for agreeing to be the first ever guest on our first live session.
I'm probably the first sucker you could find who said yes.
You were.
Exactly. Thank you for having me.
No, not a problem at all. So for those people that maybe aren't too familiar with you or your background, can you share a little bit of your story?
Yeah, sure. So I started off, I went to university, worked at IBM for 10 years when IBM was cool, I was going to say Microsoft, but I mean that's like 100 years out, although it is becoming cool again. And then I wanted to be an entrepreneur, so I would say my first 6 years at IBM, I thought that's where I would be forever. It was the best job in the world. And then after 6 years, I got this, I would say, entrepreneurial seizure. And I suddenly decided I wanted to be in business and no idea how to go about it. So for 4 years, I thought about every opportunity, missed everything under the gun, like the takeoff of PCs, missed every possible opportunity. And then I went from there to another great business I became a partner in. It was called IDB, In Dad's Business. Loser. Anyway, so I bought the business out from the family though a couple of years later and took it over and became my business. And I think that was the start of my entrepreneurial journey. And in fact, that legacy business, I just merged it with another company this year. So that's been like a 20-odd year journey. But in the meantime, I started another business and that really I was just a small business owner for many years. I started off employing one person who still works for me, and we grew to about 20 people. And then I realised there was a bigger opportunity to be had overseas, and I became pretty much a startup founder because in the year 2000, the Y2K bug forced me to rewrite my software, and I accidentally developed an internet-based system, had no idea what it was going to do, and it revolutionised our business. And we took that software to the USA, became a proper startup, and 18 months later we exited. And then I basically retired, came back to Australia, and thought, how can I lose money the quickest? I think I'll invest in startups, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
So going back to the start of your journey, so you mentioned you were at IBM for 6 years, and then you
10 years.
10 years, sorry, and you caught the bug. Was there anything that kind of instigated that change in you from being in that corporate space to going, you know what, I want to start my own?
Alcohol. No, really. I'm actually not. I think I was always a closet entrepreneur. But in those days, I love it when people say in those days. I mean, this was really the mid-80s. There was no online, right? So there was no easy way to create a business that didn't require a lot of capital. So it was very hard, I think, for people to do a startup. Whereas now, the cost of doing a startup is, less than $50,000, less than 2 or 3 months, a couple of people cutting some code, and you can launch and see if you're successful. So I think the barriers have dropped dramatically.
Sure. And so obviously you touched on your sort of angel investing at the moment, and that's probably what you spend most of your time doing?
Yeah, pretty much. So what happened was I thought this startup stuff is so easy because I could do it and sell my business to somebody, so anybody can do it. So I thought what I would do is try and repeat the success and create a couple of my own startups, walk the talk. So I thought, I'll allocate like $500,000 of my cash and basically launch $10,000, $50,000 businesses and see how they go. So I built 2 and didn't launch either. I thought this is a stupid idea. So when we came back to Australia in really 2011, I was introduced to the idea of Y Combinator, and that's when we decided to create AngelCube, which was probably my first foray into the real startup space. And that's what I was doing pretty much full time until last year. when we decided we're not going to run AngelCube for another year.
Sure. And so as part of AngelCube, I mean, you get so many people that apply to you. And as an investor as well, I'm sure you get a lot of people through office hours and through other initiatives that reach out to you. What is it specifically that makes you look at investment opportunities and go, yes, this is the one that I want to put money in?
So I think, first of all, I'm not really looking for investment opportunities. So I see it as I'm very risk averse, surprisingly. You might find that very difficult to believe given all I've done. But I actually work from fear, not from greed. So, I hate to lose money more than I like to make money. Three ways of saying the same thing. So I think I just like to meet with entrepreneurs and give back and help. And in that process, I think I get emotionally involved very quickly. I like people, I like their ideas, and I think I connect very quickly. And that leads me naturally in wanting to help founders and possibly invest.
Sure.
So it's really the people first, by far.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously people like Paul Naftali from Rampersand and a few other sort of early stage investors have mentioned the same. What is it specifically that, makes up a good founder for you?
That's a really hard one. I think enthusiasm, obviously. I think, an investor is a person as well first. So if you don't have good interpersonal skills, it's going to be really difficult to connect with anybody, let alone an investor, which is perhaps, it's not necessarily fair because some people could be very analytical, could have a great startup, but most successful startups require selling. And if you can't connect with an investor, probably means you can't sell. So I think successful startups are skewed towards people rather than necessarily even technology. I think they go hand in hand. But I think the people probably are more important in most cases, certainly for the types of startups that I invest in. The second thing is I like startups who are prepared to share information, good and bad. So I don't join any boards. I'm not interested in joining boards because I figure the startups I invest in want me to invest and I want to invest in them because we've had this engaged communication process. So why would the process of investing in them stop that communication process? So why do I need to join the board? What am I going to say to them at the board meeting that would be different than I would say to them one-on-one? And am I going to say, you must do this, and if you don't, I'm going to exercise my board right to fire you as a CEO when I've just put, $100,000 into you? It's way too early. So I think it's that engagement. And the third thing I would say is a learning mind. So a lot of founders like to believe that they have the answer to every question, know everything, and could solve all problems because there's a lot of, some of them probably can, but I think that that's an indication that you don't have a learning mind and things change and you have to be able to learn. So those are probably all the three things I look for, and none of them got anything to do with a startup.
Sure. I remember seeing a tweet of yours a couple of months ago, and we talked about this yesterday, about you saying that you've got 50 plus investments now, and not one of them had actually gotten back to you and given you a monthly or a quarterly report. Can you share, so after a startup receives funding, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see?
Well, so if you're asking me specifically about reporting, I think that reporting doesn't need to be onerous. Again, and I'm talking about really early stage. So my whole segment of investing is if you have a quadrant of from tech to non-tech, I'm tech, and early to medium to late stage, I'm early stage. That's all I'm interested in. So all the comments I make and all my experience is really around early stage startups, although I've scaled my own and I've done M&A and all those things at a later stage, but my whole interest area is early stage. So you've got to temper my comments around that. So reporting should not be onerous for an early stage startup, but it's important to engage your investors and engage your mentors, and just simple monthly and quarterly updates. In fact, Nathan Sampamon, my co-founder at AngelCube and the founder of Inspire, just put out a great blog post, which I think everybody should dig up and read, about how to do quarterly and monthly reporting.
Sure. I'll make sure we include that in the show notes for those people listening. So obviously you've been part of the startup ecosystem, especially in Melbourne, for a really long time, through things like AngelCube and Inspire 9 as well. What are some of the things that you've seen change over that time?
Look, the ecosystem has developed. I mean, you've got General Assembly, you've got Inspire 9, you've got, AngelCube, Slingshot. You've got so many opportunities now for a founder that didn't exist when we started AngelCube in 2011. And in fact, that was our reason for starting AngelCube. It wasn't about, making money or it was no commercial aspect to it, even though we raised it as a fund and it has to produce a return for the investors. But for Nathan and I, it was a social enterprise, is at least the way I view it, because there was no startup ecosystem worth talking about. Inspire 9, I found out just now, by the way, I've been involved for 5 years. Inspire 9 means there were 9 people that got a shared space. I had no idea. I was Inspire 10, I think. Really the community was very small, but now it's very broad. So it's changed completely in the last 5 years. And I think we can all be very proud of that.
Sure. One of the things that's kind of happened, and again, we kind of spoke about this yesterday, was a lot of startup founders looking at investment as almost their finish line, and celebrating funding when it should be a milestone. Can you kind of share what you think funding should be in terms of like the stage of the business?
It's actually interesting that you say that, because I just got an email from the University of New South Wales, who produced a report about accelerators and incubators, and they're doing an updated version of it. And literally this morning I responded, and they came up with like 5 metrics around how to validate whether an accelerator is doing well or not. And some of the measures were like, what percentage of startups have raised money after 12 months? How many are still in business, and all those things. And I thought about it, and I thought the only metric that really matters is, did the founders exit, at least from an investor's point of view. And for an accelerator, it's a fund, so it's all about exits. But that can take 9 years. But the point is, so we celebrate that startups raise money. We do that a lot in Australia. And AngelCube stats are roughly 50% of startups that complete the program raise money within 6 to 12 months. And about half of those in Australia, about half of those in the USA. Now, I don't know if any of you are involved in startups, but 50% is massively more than the average startup in the street, I believe. And I know StartMate's got similar stats as well. So that's a great measure to celebrate. But in some respects, I thought about this, that for a fund who's investing in, say, 10 or 100 startups, the old numbers are that you want 1 or 2 startups to be, Uber. The 3rd startup will break even, and the other 7 will disappear. So why would you want the other 7 to raise money and be in business for longer, when isn't it better for the founders, if they're going to fail, it would be one of those 7 anyway, to fail quickly and go and do another startup that might be in one of the first 2. So my whole point about it is, of course, raising money is great, but I just don't think it's necessarily a critical metric, even though we raise money.
Yeah, I was actually meeting with a startup founder today who just hired their 30th employee, and they've never raised a dollar of funding at all, and they're creating some amazing tech as well. So do you think that funding is for everyone, or do you think that there's a particular stage when startups should look for funding?
Well, I probably have to walk the talk. I mean, when I had my own business, I had no idea about venture capital. So I knew I couldn't raise money from banks, and yet I had to expand globally. So I had an operation in Australia, one in New Zealand, and then one in Chicago, one in the USA. And I had no idea about VC. Now, in the end, I did a joint venture, which is giving I actually gave 49% of my business away, but it gave me not just money, it gave me a whole platform and a client base. So I think startups do need leverage. But my point was, when I sold my business, it wasn't a massive, like, Uber-sized exit, but I had no one to share the money with. I was a solo founder, which is, I say you shouldn't have solo founders, and I didn't raise a penny from anybody. So whatever money I got, aside from the tax department, went into my pocket. So there's something to be said for that. But it did take me a long time to get to the point. Maybe I could have done it quicker if I raised money. I don't know.
Sure. And so you mentioned earlier with your own business that you decided to move to the US. Can you share a little bit about why you decided to do that?
Yeah, that's a great point, because one of the things I say is I didn't start off as a startup founder. For me, startups are not about tech. They're about growth. And I think Paul Graham says that what differentiates startup from a small business is the growth curve they're on. And so I started off just as a small business person, as an entrepreneur. I think I had this vague idea that I was going to be, Richard Branson one day in the back of my head, but really I had no plan. My plan was just to, churn the machine every day, which was, customers at one end, employees the other, dollars coming in, hopefully more dollars coming out. And I was the lowest paid employee in my own business. I was taking $50,000 a year when I think I had earned $65,000 a year at IBM, like 5 years before that. Now that's in the 80s, so 50 grand is probably 150,000 now. It's not shabby, but still it was a low salary. So I was a very, low paid employee for a long, long time. And I thought I was just one day it was going to happen for me. And then one day I sat down and did a back of the envelope exercise that literally took me 15 to 20 minutes. And I calculated what did I need to sell my business for in order to retire one day. And the number was, I wanted 5 million, right? We're not talking about huge amount of money in startup world. We want 5 million. Still a lot of money for most small business people. And I calculated, well, what profit does that mean? Well, you sell a private company for 3 to 5 times profit. So I probably need $1 million profit a year. Problem was, I think I was making 20 grand a month at that stage. So that was a long way to $1 million. When I did the calculation of how many customers I would need to generate $1 million profit a year, it was every single corporate in Australia, 1,000. Never going to happen. So once I did that exercise, that's when I became a startup founder. Then I realised Australia's not going to do it for me, and I actively hopped on an airplane, flew around the world, and found my opportunity and went and took it.
Sure. Is that, we were talking about this, I had a very similar story as well. When you're running a startup, you're just stuck in the day-to-day grind, and sometimes it's difficult to take that step back and go, what are the actual numbers that we need of people to come to then convert, to then actually result in the sales that we have. At what stage do you think startups should do that basic exercise?
They should do it from day 1 and then day 10 and again, even before they launch. And I might have said to you when we met actually that at AngelCube, we probably get 100 startups applying to us every year, between 80 and 150. And they're different every year, which is amazing. So it's Melbourne for you. Mostly Melbourne. We get some from interstate and even some from overseas. But the vast majority are Melbourne based, and that was really heartening. And then we interview 20 in a day, which is great. And then we come down to about 7 or 8 that we actually invite into the program. Of those 7 or 8, most of them we get to pivot on the very first day. So I'll give you an example. About 2 years, maybe 3 years ago, we usually have our opening day at 99 Designs, their old office in Collingwood, because we just want to show the startup founders what the end of the journey looks like. 99 Design is a pretty successful Australian startup, you have to admit. And we had a team of 4 people come in with an idea. Maybe I won't say what the idea is, but a team of 4 people, and they wanted to do a service. And I just called them up, and we did some hot desking, and we had a look at how much money could they make. It took me all of 5 minutes to show them on the wall that they couldn't possibly make money. So when we came back from lunch, the 4 people were sitting like that, 2 and 2, because they were having an inside argument about whether they should pivot the business model or not. And by the end of the day, they didn't turn up at the next day. And by the way, that's how the guys at app.io got in, because we had a 7th spot. We invited them in and told them that their social network on a mobile phone product was never going to work, pivot, and that's how they came up with the app.io thing, which took them to 500 startups.
Yep.
There you go. So I think you should do it straight away.
Sure.
It's 5 minutes, please, do it.
So when you made the decision to move to the US, I spoke to James Catamol, who was also another guest on the podcast, and he mentioned that a lot of startup founders, when they move to the US, think that it's going to be exactly the same, but there are very, very big differences that happen as soon as you sort of look into different regions. Was there anything that you kind of saw was very different culturally, or who you were selling to when you moved there?
And completely, and this is really interesting. So the analogy, I guess, is a lot of founders come to me at AngelCube and personally with some idea that they've picked up that works in America and they want to translate it to Australia. So this is kind of logical. Mostly I say the market's too small in Australia. America's 300 million people, so we've got 23 million people, so just use some of your brains. Most startup founders should be starting here and taking to America, not the other way around. But to be fair, there are some things you can fast follow. Here's the problem, okay? We like to think, or we used to think in my day, maybe it's less so now, that we're the 51st state of America, because we get our television from America, we get a lot of our culture from there. When America goes to war, with their 50 million ships, we send our 3 rowboats following after them. We're here to help. That was the attitude, at least in my day. And after living in America, the culture is vastly different. Not only is it vastly different in America to Australia, it's vastly different in America to America. So the obvious are like New York versus other states. You just got to watch Seinfeld or any other New York-based shows to see how neurotic they are, to realise that they're different to everywhere else. But I'll give you one classic example that blew me away when I arrived in America. So first of all, when we decided to come up with our rostering for our annual leave strategy for our staff in Australia, we sat down and did the calculation, and we realised that between annual leave, sick leave, national public holidays, state-based public holidays, plus we gave our staff an RDO, so we gave them half-hour lunch instead of 1 hour lunch, which was their choice. We put it to staff votes, so we gave them an extra day off a month. So it was another 12 or 13 days off a year we gave them. We added all those together. That was 50 days annual leave a year. So we just said to everybody, here's 50 days, use it how you like. We'll pay you cash, you can use it. Don't even have to put a leave application form in. Just have the courtesy to call us up in the morning if you're not coming in, so we can cover your shift. That was it. Pretty good employers, really, weren't we, for a small company? So 50 days. We arrive in America, and I'm driving down the road, on the wrong side, of course, and I see a bus stop, and there's an advertising thing on the side of the bus stop, and it says, please take at least 1 week's annual leave a year. It's healthy for you. So think about that. Who in Australia you have to say, please take a holiday? And like when we took over this business, we took over some existing staff. One of my staff members had 20 years annual leave owing to her. It was only 2 weeks a year. So we made her take half immediately. She came back 6 months later, and we paid out the other half in cash. This is the American mentality, is almost completely different to the Australian mentality. And that's really important. So let's say, for example, you're doing a social startup. You're going to be the next Snapchat or something. So I run this organisation called Investors Org, and it's a non-profit, and we keep it very low key. And the idea is to try and get the really rich people in Australia to take a small percentage of their checkbooks and write checks to startups. Now they're not going to do that if we ask them for money. So what we do instead, we educate them and excite them, and we hope one day they'll go looking. And we brought out a guy named Jonathan Teo out from America, T-E-O. He'd lived in Australia, Singaporean, moved to America, joined Google, and then joined a couple of VC funds. He is the guy who invested his own money in Snapchat. He is the guy who got Benchmark Capital or General Catalyst, one of those two, to put the first money into Instagram. He is the guy who got them to put money into Twitter. They were the largest investor in Twitter. He is Mr. Social, and he does not believe that a social startup will come out of Australia. It'll only come out of the USA or out of China because they're two big markets, and from the local people understand the culture. A long answer to something that says, if you're doing the next Snapchat, pivot.
So on that, and again, we kind of spoke about this yesterday, what are on the flip side, what are some of the advantages or opportunities that are in Australia for startups here?
So on the flip side, I think there are some real opportunities that open up from taking maybe American models as inspiration, maybe not. I'll give you an example, but applying it differently to Australia. So Australia has obviously got some disadvantages. We're 23 million people, and we're spread across a landmass as large as the contiguous states, the 48 contiguous states of the North America of the United States. So that opens up some challenges. But you might say, okay, well, there's the internet, big deal. But the fact is, you do have to see people and face to face, and we just have some disadvantages. But we also have some big advantages in that we have a concentration of population that doesn't exist in a lot of other countries, like the USA, for example. So 60%, I would say, of I don't know what the exact numbers are, but certainly when I was in my business, 60% of my clients were based in either Melbourne or in Sydney. And all their people and all their stuff, Melbourne and Sydney. To get that same concentration in the USA, you would need at least 50 cities. So think about if you're trying to roll out a startup that needs a community management approach. It needs a city, like Uber. You need a community manager. In Australia, you just need 2 cities to do that in, and you've got 60% of the market done. USA, you've got to have 50 cities to even think about it. So there are things we can do in Australia with startups that you can't do. So I'll give you an example, and you might go out and do this tomorrow. I was approached in office hours by at least 3 different startups over the space of 2 weeks trying to do catering for corporates. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to do like a menu log for catering. We have lots of caterers on one side and lots of corporates on the other side. Here is the problem. With a corporate customer, with With a consumer, it's okay. If you muck up and you order a burrito on Uber Eats and they don't come on time and you're unhappy, tomorrow you'll order it through Menulog. The next day you'll order it through delivery. It makes no difference, okay? And they don't care either. Because, okay, we had a bad customer experience, put it on Twitter, and people come back to you. Okay? Can you edit that out? Yeah, it doesn't matter. But for a corporate startup, where it could take you 2 years to sign Telstra up and get them to use your catering service, you have some caterer you've never used before, and they executives order a meal and that caterer doesn't deliver, you've lost the whole account. So clearly in a place like Australia, you would only have 1 or 2 caterers in both cities, solve the supply side that way, and get the customer side going before adding more. So things like that. So, if you're dealing with B2B, control the supply side, keep it tight and narrow, get the customers. With C2C, it's a little bit different. But that's what I mean? Yeah.
Sure. Are there any particular industries or verticals that are really exciting you at the moment?
Again, it depends. So I'm not a futurist, so I'm more excited by entrepreneurs and by traction. And of course, I'm excited by gross margin and good unit economics. So I like businesses. I like B2C obviously as well, but there's no unit economics in B2C. I don't like B2B when it's small business, because there's no good unit economics and you can't acquire a customer for any price that can make you a profit. But I do like, medium to large enterprise type businesses where you can sell one widget that may cost you $1 and the enterprise will pay you $1,000. That's really great and you can make a lot of money from that. But I do like, so it depends on whether your focus is Australia or global. But when it comes to, say, a startup that just wants to launch in Australia and then maybe go global one day, I think there's probably only 3 or 4 industries that I really do like. One is real estate. I like the idea of not, linking, rating agents and all those sorts of things. I mean, the idea of the person who comes up to me and finds a clever way where I can buy and sell a house as an e-commerce transaction, that's believing. Now, I'm not saying these are easily solvable problems, but I love that. Imagine what you cost, you can acquire a customer for $1,000 because the commission is probably $3,000. I like that. Same with cars. So I've backed a startup called Top a Car, and they're doing buying and selling of cars. So they're like a BP, BEEPI for Australia. So BP is a startup that started, I think, in Los Angeles, and they're selling hundreds of millions of dollars of used cars online, 100% online transaction, because they've taken all the risk out of the transaction. So for example, you want to sell a car, I will give you a guaranteed price after inspection. If I don't sell in 45 days, I'll buy it from you anyway at that guaranteed price. I'll then go find a consumer at the other end, and they don't have to buy the car online. They just pay me $50 deposit. I'll deliver the car for them. They can have the car for 7 days. If they don't want it, they just return it. If they do want it, they get to keep it. All the friction's taken out of the transaction. Why do I like that? Again, it's a large transaction. So Australia's a small market. So if you've got a small market, have large transactions. So it's houses, cars, and logistics. I love the logistics space, but not the way any of the startups in Australia. Some have raised a lot of money at doing it. Most of them will have exited, maybe for small, decent amounts, but not the way most people are doing it.
Sure. And so you spoke a little bit earlier about the need for early stage founders to have traction. Mm-hmm. What is it that you specifically mean by traction? Because I know that when I was with Startup Victoria, we were doing the pitch nights, people would say, "Oh, we got featured in StartupSmart or Startup Daily," and that's traction for us.
Oh, that's awesome! Wow.
Can you elaborate a little bit more from an investor perspective what you specifically mean by traction?
So, I've got a technology degree. I worked for IBM. I've got a computer science degree and meteorology, which I know nothing about the weather. But I don't like investing in really technical startups because I don't understand the underlying technology, because somebody else could be doing it. But what I do like is when people with smart technology have got customers that are buying their product, because those customers are very smart. It's using crowd thinking. So traction is when people buy your product. That's the best possible traction there is. And when enough people buy your product to be statistically valid, and when that number is growing at a compounding rate that you can say this startup is going to compound and grow big through pure compounding maths, I like that. So that's the best for me. But does that say that I just want to invest in startups creating revenue? Of course not. Then you never invest in Facebook. So you've got to find what the number one metric that matters for that startup is, and that's what I focus on. That's traction. I'll give you a personal example. So when AngelCube was over, I took one of the teams that failed. I had this great idea because I'm a genius, and it was to do Uber for hotel bookings, right? So I took the team, I gave them money, I guaranteed them $150,000 as, be the first investor to build this thing. And we did all the lean start process. We built an Android app, and someone booked a hotel, and we thought that was great. They rebooked one, so that's product market fit because it's a repeat booking. So I said, let's not worry about Australia, just go to San Francisco and do it there. Because, we should be able to launch it there. And after 3 months, they got 0 hotel bookings, 0. So I would say that if you've got a hotel booking app and your metric is 0, I'd say that's a sign that you don't have traction. So the reverse of that would be hotel bookings,
sure.
Right?
So apart from being a genius and being guaranteed 150K...
We're talking about me now?
Yeah, in funding. Okay. What should startup founders that are looking for investing look for in investors?
Cash. In Australia, I hate to say that it's probably true that we like to say that you should look for an investor, obviously, that you get on well with as a relationship thing. Somebody wrote about a hiring thing about the beer test and the barbecue test, which I thought was really good. I can't remember who it was. It was somebody. But when hiring an employee, you should first of all think, would I like to have a beer with this person? And then would I invite them to a barbecue to meet my mates? And that's probably, I think, when you're investing in a startup, or when the startup is investing in an investor, I think it's the same thing. You're getting married, so you better get on well interpersonally. So I've even forgot what the question was.
What should founders look for?
Yeah, in investors. So it's obviously those things. You want domain experience. So you want somebody ideally who understands the space and some of the problems you might have going in. But there's a flip side to that, because I like to say that every investor and even mentor is radioactive. There's a half-life to their knowledge, and their half-life begins the second that they've exited from their own business, because their world has stopped. So my world in my business stopped in 2006. Let me tell you, the world of handling car accidents for corporate fleets, really pumping, exciting area that is, that's moved on in, I hope, in the 10 years. So my knowledge in that space has gone and done that. And by the way, for you on the podcast, I'm pointing down. The knowledge has gone down. So you have to be careful about domain experience. That I don't think that investors and founders and mentors know as much as they want to make on. And what I say to founders is this: you have to listen to all the advice you're given, because not to listen to the advice is to miss out, but you have to act on 50% of it. The problem is, I don't know which 50%. Only you know which 50%. If you do any less or any more, you will fail.
Interesting. And so finally, we kind of touched on the experience that you've had in the ecosystem. Where would you like things to go, and what would you like to see more of?
Oh, that's a really good question. What would I like to see more of? These events? I think we need to have... I would like to see more founders helping founders. I think that's founders helping founders is much more important than investors helping founders or other mentors helping founders. Probably would like to see more of that. I would like to see fewer conferences. I hate conferences unless I'm speaking at them, and they're fantastic. Because I think that startups are learning by doing. I'll tell you one thing that I'm passionate about, but if I was really passionate, I would actually go for my ass and do it. But I will do it at some stage, is I think that there's a huge opportunity to activate high school students into trying out startups. And the reason why I say that is my son, who's been through 500 startups and has his own, on his own bat, but he actually started his first business when he was 12. We were living in America, and he started a eBay business. And then he did a couple of eBay businesses through that, and he started an online business, which he still owns, and then started his startup. And what I learned from that was he didn't need any help from me. He just did it himself. And because you can do an eBay business or a drop shipping business, or you can start some sort of website, or you can do a blog, there's lots of things that high school students can do, and it gets them, doesn't matter whether they're successful or not, that's not the relevant part. It gets them to learn that doing a startup is actually really easy. So it gets them over the fear of doing a startup and gets them to understand the process of doing a startup. And then one day they'll come up with something successful. So that's something I'd really like to see happen.
Sure. And for those listeners on the podcast who want to get in touch with you, find out more, follow your story, what's the best way for them to do that?
So obviously 2 ways is one to DM me on my Twitter account at SmallTimeVC. You can also get access to me through my office hours. So every Wednesday morning I have office hours with founders. So if you're trying to work on something, trying to solve a problem, you can by all means come and pitch me, ask me for money. But the best way to get money out of an investor is to ask for advice. So humour me, pretend you value my advice, and then I'll get all excited and I'll throw my checkbook at you. Or they can just email me at adrian@angelcube.com.
Perfect. Adrian, thanks so much for sharing your insights today. It's been fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to episode 23 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. You can find the show notes of my interview with Adrian along with a curated list of tools and resources for startup founders at startupplaybook.co. As always, you can join the conversation through our Twitter account. The handle is @PlaybookStartup. Next week, I interview Paul Bassett, the co-founder of Seek, one of Australia's most successful companies to date with a market cap of close to $5 billion. He's also the co-founder of SquarePeg Capital, one of the premier venture capital firms in Australia. Along with these roles, Paul is also a non-executive director at Wesfarmers, Director of Innovation Australia, and on the AFL Commission. In the interview, Paul shares his insights on the team dynamics that he looks for, why good businesses focus on solving problems, and the importance of attracting high-quality talent. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at episode 24 next week.